Hi everyone. I posted a resource on Twitter earlier, and I just thought I would produce a little walkthrough for it so that if you are um, interested, you can send me a direct message and I'll send it over to you so you can edit it and make it applicable to your subject, to your school, to your classroom, and the way you do things. Um, I think it's been really important to consider what our routines are going to be and how we establish those. It's been a long time since teachers and students have been interacting in the classroom setting, and I think there's a lot of good material out there that we can draw upon and put something together. So uh, this is drawn upon different material from very familiar names to many of you, I'm sure. People like Tom Bennett or Tom Sherrington, Paul Dix, Bill Rogers, those kinds of names. And I've always tended to um, really have a look at them all. Take what I think works for me, works for the students that I have. Take the best bits, and I found that to be a really healthy way of operating. To just consider what I think fits with what I'm trying to achieve, the culture that I'm trying to influence and bring about in the room. So this is a bit of a mixture of some of the things that you may have heard those guys talk about. Importantly, the idea of this lesson, or it might even be part of a lesson, depending on how long yours are, is that it's about preparing in a preventative way, preempt behaviors, be as specific and explicit as possible, so that we can help prevent the behavior arising in the first place. So this might help to start off the new year. You may be back already, I appreciate, or maybe in the next day or so. And obviously, if you gain a new class, you can draw upon this too. I think there's three phases with establishing routines and your classroom management. There is an established phase where you have to teach the things you want to see and model them. We've got to consolidate it. In that phase, that's where we want to do things like early correction and rule reminding, that kind of correction. Describe why the behavior isn't as it needs to be, why it's not okay, or indeed why it is okay, to flip it positively too. And of course, there's a maintain phase, where, of course, this is where you have to come back to the routines less and less. And I think those three phases can take different amounts of time depending on the class as well. So, but what I wanted to say is this PowerPoint is really the established bit only. Please don't forget to do the consolidate and the maintain. And that may take a couple of weeks. It may take a half term. It may take the whole year. Okay, to a greater or lesser extent. That's what it's trying to achieve. So I hope it's useful for you. I set out what the lesson is going to involve. Right at the end there in the bottom bullet point, you can see that I will, if there's time, I'll introduce them, of course, to their first topic. In my case, I do English and humanities. So I'll talk about the fact this lesson is learning what the routines are. We'll practice them where we can, and I'll quiz them at the end to see how much they can remember. And I also talk about the 3 R's. Bill Rogers calls them these three R's: rights, responsibilities, and rules. What are they in your classroom? It's important to consider what your school rules are. If there's anything that sort of underpins or is overarching, it's good to link it with that, or indeed they may be given to you. And so make that clear. And if they are school rules, as it were, or values, then it's important to think, how am I going to make that explicit and model those in my class? They're not just words. I would hugely advocate the need to model physically what these routines look like. These are some bullet points on a slide. You may think there's too many. Take them out, delete some, omit them if you think it's too many. But I would rather talk about all the small things. I like that phrase, sweat the small stuff, focus on the small details, and you can withdraw from there, and so on. So each slide has a question at the top of it from a student perspective. So this one is, how do we enter and exit the classroom? Again, these are obviously, they're going to be practiced at the bottom of the slide there. It's a reminder for me and the class, this is going to be expected at the beginning of next lesson, the entering. And of course, the end of the current lesson you're in, the exit will be modelled and practiced. Obviously, there's an extra element for us this time around with the fact they're going to need to sanitize before entering. Perhaps they do that on exit as well in your school. Uniform, those kind of expectations remain the same. That's making sure they are in correct uniform, and you are going to correct them as they enter and as they exit if needed. In our school, we actually students walk silently to their chair and they stand behind it, and then the teacher gives the instruction to sit and get on with the do now activity. Again, that is not something I strongly advocate either way. It's something that we just do. I don't say that flippantly, like we just do it and we haven't questioned it. It's thought through, and it's something that we've decided that we all do. That can be something difficult to enforce if you're the only one doing it. If you want to ask me about that and why we do that, feel free. But essentially, you can take that out. I'm not saying this is really important. It's just part of our routines at the school I'm in. An orderly manner when we exit. I do it a row at a time. We're going to be sat in rows. And as they do that, obviously we want to check it's clean and tidy. They stand there behind it silently, and you've got complete control as they exit, in the same way you had control when they enter. Doug Lemov talks about that threshold concept. When they enter the classroom, that is your space, that's your domain, it's class learning time, it needs protecting. In the same way, when they exit your classroom, it's important to reiterate what your expectations are as they leave as well, and that you direct that accordingly. In many cases, it might be that the class are already in the room before us. If we're transitioning between classes, as teachers, we're moving around, the class stays where they are. We're going to have students stand up when the teacher enters, when I enter, and wait to then be seated for the register. As they're waiting, I'm going to provide probably a do now question or activity at the end of the previous lesson, which can then be completed whilst they're waiting, and they can continue during the register as well. Or equally, it could be that I'll give them time to prepare or have a look over information they might need for some kind of spelling or retrieval quiz or test as well. So register ready, that phrase you can see on the screen, is all about having your equipment on the desk, being in the correct uniform, being the right attitude, and completing the do no activity, and not disrupting or distracting anyone else. Essentially, that's what that means. Obviously, at times I might emphasize different things and explain their importance as I'm talking through these things. Obviously, I deliver it a bit differently when I'm in the classroom, but I'm just trying to whiz through some of these ideas here for you. How do I organise my equipment and belongings? That's a key one. How you're storing things with books and so on. Where do you want them to put them at the end? How do you want them to get them there? Are you going to have monitors in the room? Are they, what's that going to look like? Talk about your procedures. Obviously, in our case, we only want to use our own equipment. We're not sharing things. And we want it all out on the desk. We actually have, we call our form tutors coaches, and we want in the morning the coach to check that each student has everything they need. So that can be quickly sorted, and no one has to have the same conversation throughout the day. So everyone will have what they need. We haven't got lockers this time. So again, where are they going to put their coat? Where are they going to put their bag? What does that look like? Show them a good example and a bad example if you need to, with a year 7 class perhaps, or even year 11, dare I say. Get straight in the furniture, tuck your chair in when you leave. It should look as you would want to find it, and that's a really key thing that I talk about. Again, you can check that at the various points in the lesson when you need to. Also, just to say that I've got some notes here, as well as watching this video. You can also read those notes. There's a couple of little scripts from time to time at the bottom that might help illustrate what kinds of things I might say as well at this point. This is a really key one. How am I going to ask for their attention? How am I going to get the class attention? I know I've seen this phrase about going from everyone listening to everyone talking back to everyone listening. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to transition between tasks? For me, it's a very simple 3, 2, 1, everyone listening, eyes and ears this way. And I, for some reason, I do raise my hand in the air a little as well as a bit of a non-verbal cue that I'm waiting, and it should be, listen immediately, remain silent, don't distract anyone around you, and so on. So, and then insist upon that. There's various other things that I would do there, but essentially that's what I say. And I actually, obviously I lower my hand when I've got everyone, and I say certain things if I'm still waiting. Yeah, again, if you want to ask about that, then get in touch, that's fine. I also talk about this star behavior. So when everyone is listening, this is a teach like a champion strategy. Very simple. I really like the acronym. It's about sitting up. We don't want heads on desks. We track the speaker, ask and answer questions, respect those around you. I like track the speaker. I really like this because it is a value behind that, because it shows that whoever is talking is valued, what they're saying is important. So if that's someone, a member of the class, or indeed you, we're looking, we've got eye contact. I think that's an important thing. However, you may not feel that is as important, and indeed you can take that out of the slide if that's not what you use, or you have a different acronym or something else. That is absolutely fine. There's not one way of doing all this. This is just a way, and things that I've found to be particularly useful over the years. Talk to your partner. So this is a time where we're going to need to, the yellow at the bottom there, set up some talk partners, and we're going to use those in the lesson in a moment. Basically, we'll talk about the fact, we're going to think and talk together before sharing ideas as a class. That's what your talk partner is there for. You may want to pair up 2 sets of talk partners so that there is a 4. So if you do need to do that, people used to call that snowballing, I believe, in the past as a technique. You can do, and again, that can be really useful, because if you have a group of 4 and they number themselves 1, 2, 3, 4, you could say at the end of the discussion, right, all number 2s stand up, and you could survey the room and ask a few different groups what they've come up with, what their best answers were. And I think that's really good. It means that everyone's got to be ready. Everyone's got to know the answers. You can't just have 1 or 2 who know. All 4 need to know it and be ready to share. That's what that one's all about. Then I explain to students basically what the strategy cold calling looks like in practice. When I'm checking for understanding or explaining things and questioning, I'm going to say somebody's name. So they don't need to put their hand up. They can put their hand up if they want to agree, build, or challenge this ABC discussion strategy. I also say, you know what? It's fine to say I don't know, because we don't all know everything. That's why we're here to learn, okay? But I will come back to them, and I make sure that I do. In the next, in the practice phase, you can see at the bottom there, I've just picked a random discussion point. You could change it for your subject, of course. This is where we practice using the talk partners, generate ideas, tell them how many ideas to come up with, ask them for all of them back, and then as part of the discussion, you could do this agree, build, or challenge by going through the talk partners. And again, I would model what that sounds like. What phrases might somebody use? If you type into Google Images, agree, build, challenge, there'll be nice little sentence stems you may even want to display, on the screen whilst you're discussing things. But the important thing is you come back to people if they don't know. I think that's a really powerful, and you have to make sure that you do it consciously. Then I talk a bit about presentation, how we complete work. In this particular season, I would advocate having periods of silence during what you might call the independent phase or the practice phase, application of knowledge, etc. knowledge and skills, because that's going to help practically when I am socially distancing and helping pupils. I'm going to be able to hear them, and we can interact more easily if everyone is working silently. That's not to say I believe that we learn more in silence. Equally, I don't think we learn more when we're talking. Okay, it's a mixture. We need a happy diet of both, I think. But you see what I mean. I think if I'm trying to help people and socially distance, I'm just talking in practical terms here for this season. You may think that's important all the time anyway. If there's no reason to talk, then they shouldn't be talking, etc. Sometimes I might say, okay, during this activity, use your talk partner with a partner voice, an indoor voice, to discuss as you generate these ideas. But I would give a specific time frame to that as well. Handwriting, again, an expectation here. I've worked in a primary and secondary setting, and it's something that I do feel is important. What I have done in the past, just one idea, is I get students to copy a piece of text, not hugely long, but something they literally copy. It could be on a scrap piece of paper, or it could be in their books. If it is on a piece of paper, then I have in the past laminated it, and this becomes their expectation for them. Their writing needs to be that standard or better through the year in their books, etc. You could do that at different points of the year if you want to check progress. But it's showing the students, this is what you're able to do. And I appreciate that they're not having to think about anything else other than the handwriting. Other times they're trying to think of ideas at the same time as their handwriting, and so therefore it may dip. However, you hopefully you see the principle there, showing students what they're capable of. And indeed, you can see what they're capable of. It's that sort of that cognitive load thing. If we can reduce that, they're just focusing on one thing, their handwriting. You see their best, arguably. Tell them where to do dates and titles and rulers and all that sort of basic stuff. Again, I might use an exercise book to show students what that physically looks like under a visualizer, or I might use my phone, like a camera visualizer app to mirror on the screen as well. There's lots of apps you can use to do that at the moment. And I also think having a class exercise book can be good to model anything, to be honest. Model a task, model your thought processes, etc. Because if they can see what it looks like in a book, that's what they've got in front of them. So they'll know what you're wanting them to produce as well. I do make the point that editing writing, and as I said, I've got an English humanities background, it can end up looking messy. And you know what? That's okay. Sometimes editing does look a bit messy. You may disagree with me on that one, but I do say, aim to do it as neatly as possible, because it's easier to track your changes. For one, have it organized as you're editing can be very useful. But sometimes don't be afraid to go over work. Editing should look a bit messy, a bit crazy. If I was editing a piece of work, I'd have annotations and scribbles all over the place. I may then need to write it up again so I can make sense of it. But you know what I mean? It's allowing students to think, do you know what, it's okay to make changes if these are improvements to my work. And it can look a bit messy at times as we do that. Obviously, check what they've done under a visualizer there. Moving around the room, this is very much about just asking permission, just making it really clear. We just can't get up when we want to. Putting our hands up, we don't want students, again, this is an opinion of mine, I suppose. I don't want 3 or 4 people saying my name, calling out to me for my help. They will put their hand up and wait their turn silently, patiently. I do say to them, as you're waiting, why don't you check all the resources you have, check instructions on the board or any prompt sheets that you've been given, have a go while you're waiting, just have a go. And if you can't do that, move on to the next part of something or a different question. Anything would be good there. Sometimes, of course, that's impossible for them, but give them some strategies that might be useful for them. Particularly useful now in this season, having some sort of prompt sheet or worked example, on the board or on on a worksheet for them, I think can be very helpful. Okay, then we move on to consequences. Now, you might not want to get into this at this particular stage. I've found it to be particularly useful, so that it's very clear that consequences are proportionate, they're fair, and obviously you might want to talk about the school system at this point. Yellow words there may need explaining as vocabulary. Perhaps you could think of some synonyms, antonyms, if you want to be really clever, and so on, or some tier 1 words that students would know. And that my right, this notion that my right is your responsibility. There are things that I do and don't do to uphold your rights. So it's a collective thing together. More on that in the next couple of slides. And I talk about how we repair and we rebuild things. If we have an issue with someone, or there's a persistent issue and I have to speak to someone, then that's we're going to talk about it. We're going to have a conversation. And that the students own their own behaviour. Nobody else is responsible for it. They own it. And then obviously we do a talk to your partner again here with the practice. Can you think of behaviours? Can you think of behaviours that infringe upon others' rights? Of course, there's some notes there again, and I talk about the fact that there are, just give some examples really to them. You might not want to talk about consequences in your first lesson. I do. That's up to you. Just don't use a slide if you would rather not. I talk about how we use resources. The key thing here is, of course, leaving it as you would like to find it. That's a really key. Even something as small as putting the lid on the pen shows respect for our resources, for our environment. If in the same way, if we went around someone's house, we would look after their things. Not that it's like that entirely, but you know what I mean. It's important to show respect for things as well as people, I believe. And so I just talk about how we use them. I'm going to be using mini whiteboards quite a lot because I want lots of low stakes quizzing and retrieval things going on, flipping from the exercise book to mini whiteboards at various points. So I need to know that they're going to be used and not doodled on. They're going to be used at the right time in the right way. So I just model what that looks like. We have a little go. They have a go at cleaning them, particularly if they're lower years as well. Then almost at the end here, we talk about the 3 R's I mentioned at the beginning. Bill Rogers' 3 R's. He talks about rights, responsibilities, and rules. 3 rights that I believe students have. Right to feel safe, the right to learn, the right to respect and fair treatment. And in this point is another discussion, and I want them to think of 2 ways we can make sure these rights, each of these 3 rights, so that's 6 ideas, are always protected in class learning time. What can we do or not do to help that? And again, feedback into the class. If someone literally does not know, then don't leave it at I don't know. Return to them. Make sure they were listening to the suggestions. What ideas did they think were really useful and the best? I then put up some ideas, the kinds of things I would have expected them to say. Just again, go through some examples, highlight any ones that they didn't say that you feel would be useful as examples for them. Again, context dependent, what you want to emphasize. At this point, you might want them to write some of this down in a sort of a mind map or something, or bullet point list, whatever. It's a collaborative process. We want to own these rights and responsibilities. And yeah, I think that can be very useful as well. Some notes there at the bottom you might want to have a look at. Again, if you don't know, I'm sure most students do, but if you don't know, we can ask ourselves these questions about our actions and behaviours, and also words we say. Is it safe? Is it fair on others? Does it help or disturb others' learning? Does it show respect and fair treatment? If it's no to any of those things, or you're not sure, it's probably best not to do it. And again, we can give some examples there. Just an extra slide, just in case. You may not need that one. Then a little activity about values. I talk about that we can value many different kinds of things in life. Possessions, friends, places, memories, etc. I want them to then talk about what are the top 3 things you value most in the classroom? You might want to give them some sentence stems or writing frames if you want to do this as a writing task. Equally, we can go back to our talk partners if you really want to establish that particular routine of everyone listening to everyone talking, back to everyone listening again. And so, yeah, you can use sort of a think, pair, share, check around the room, and discuss, what do they value? Just as to get to know them. It's also a really good way to, if you do keep using talk partners and cold calling, that's actually a really good way to learn names over the first few lessons and beyond as well. Then the big 3. 3 overarching rules, non-negotiable things here: arriving in the correct uniform with all the right equipment, showing respect, follow instructions, first time the key bit here, without answering back. And the third one, completing the work to the best of our ability. Might be worth talking about the growth mindset, this concept of not yet as well, and this idea that we're always looking to improve ourselves and get better. Learning looks like, what does learning look like? It looks like us getting better at something. There is a brain change that happens. You may want to go into the science of it more for some of the older years if you feel that's suitable. I would keep it simple though at this stage. Then I would do a little quiz, essentially, just to finish. What can the students remember? You may like to pick 1 or 2 questions here, just over the next series of lessons, to see what students have really grasped. And of course, don't forget to model each of these things and repeat it if it needs repeating. If it's not to the desired standard, do it again. There's no harm in doing that. Get it right. When you're happy with it, then we can, we can then give less direction. We can be less verbal about, and we don't have to narrate it so much as time goes on, hopefully. Hopefully you found that useful. If you would like the slides, so you can edit them and change them up according to your context and school and subject, just drop me a direct message. No problem. Equally, I can talk about any of the little things or where I found some of the strategies that I've spoken about. Hope you found it useful, and I hope you have a great start to your academic year.